So recently, the Monster Hunter Wilds beta released and I wanted to share my thoughts on it. In this beta, you had the chance to play the opening to the game and had access to 4 different monsters that are in the overworld. Right off the bat, the game grips you in with its pretty epic cinematic as you ride the newly added secret. I feel like from what I played in the series, that being Free Ultimate, World and Rise, this game's opening tutorial is excellent with getting the player accustomed to combat and the controls. You fight against this Chattacabra monster in a 1v1 fight. I noticed this time around how this game feels like a sequel to Worlds with regards to combat. Being a hammer main, I felt pretty much at home with mainly attacking the monster's head for stunning alongside 3-hit combos and charging moves. But new to Wilds is Focus Mode. This allows for more precise movement and also shows newly added weak points of the monster. In previous games, if you had a sharp weapon, you'd typically go for the tail, or with a blunt weapon, you'd aim for the head and pretty much be glued to that spot, but now with Focus Mode, it really encourages dynamic movement and positioning. It made fights feel more spontaneous, since now the best way to deal damage isn't about just going for the same strategy of focusing on one point of the monster. Weak spots can occur at any moment, further adding to this dynamic. Overall so far, I would say that Focus Mode is a great addition and really complements the gameplay whilst feeling like a substantial shake-up to combat and strategy. After that fight, the story section is pretty much over and you're free to explore the game's open world alongside interacting with other hunters online. The story so far is your typical Monster Hunter dilemma, where these keepers have had their homes destroyed by an unknown monster species. It's enough to keep intrigue, and I'm curious about how the seasons changing in this game will possibly be shown over the course of the narrative. Also, a random point, but the Seekers kind of remind me of Ico with the whole horn design thing they have going on. Anyway, moving on, with this game being in its beta phase, I expected some online issues, and they did occur from time to time, with parties being abruptly disconnected. With my favourite moment being this one instance against a Raid Dal where the entire party lost connection and I somehow managed to take it on solo. I will say though, menu navigation gave me issues. New to Wilds' 100 people lobbies, it really feels like this series wants to adopt an MMO-like structure when you factor in this being added alongside these vast amounts of options in the menus. It can be pretty overwhelming, especially for new players. What you have to do if you want to play with friends is set up a link party and then an environment link. It can be confusing at first, but once you get it all set up, you can be fighting alongside your friends. With the newly added crossplay, I was playing against PC players and can report with my experiences in the beta that there were no issues when connecting to other users outside of my console's ecosystem. This is great since crossplay has been a feature fans have been wanting for years now. Outside of some confusing menu navigation, I can say that the lack of a traditional guild system having you accepting requests is amazing. Now when you're in a group, you're free to explore this gorgeous open world, and after interacting with a monster for so long, you will engage in a quest. Afterwards, if you're having issues, you could send an SOS flare to have other players see that same quest by interacting with the handler, who now follows you around. This quality of life improvement alone makes me really prefer Wilds over previous games. Everything in general is way more smoother and seamless. After a hunt, you can move right on to another. No longer do you get booted out back to the guild and have to wait for that one player to re-equip their loadout every time or eat before a hunt. There are these small tents, kinda like checkpoints, that can be set up in certain spots that allow you to fix up your loadout and stock up on items. I didn't really understand the new mechanic in the beta when it came to setting up tents, but hopefully in the full game I'll pick up on that. Granted, the tents they already had are in good enough locations. The addictive nature of non-stop hunting is made all the better with these quality of life improvements. Tough wars are also back and feel much more natural this time around since monsters aren't stuck to certain zones. I also feel like in general they feel way less scripted in length there, which was an issue I had in World. There's also the traps that return from World that you can spring onto a monster which will deal some damage and stun advantages. On the topic of the open world, this game really is jaw-dropping with its visuals. During a hunt, the weather will naturally change like in previous games, but this time around, specifically in the desert section, the level of detail with the uneven terrain just really stood out to me. I feel like in this series, the environments get overlooked and are somewhat underrated. I could easily just walk around and soak up the vistas. This game is very pleasing to look at. I get this series is known for the hunting first and foremost, but I hope in the final build there are more incentives to just explore, since with the maps having more detail and scope, it feels wrong to just rush past everything. Maybe something like the photo mode in Breath of the Wild, or a Pokemon Snap style of photographer. Speaking of, I know this is an online game for the most part, but the photo mode will be a great addition here. My favourite monster in this beta was definitely Raidal. Its laser move where it transforms its head is a cool spectacle. The sand snake kind of monster Balahara also had a nice moveset, with its quick stand attack in particular being one of my favourites. I also noticed since we're no longer on the Switch or PlayStation 4 with the stronger hardware, monsters hang out in packs way more often, which can add to how you want to approach them in a fight. Kind of like they can call for backup in their own way and rank your numbers, which I found interesting. Maybe the final game will experiment more with this dynamic. Talking about combat, I'm glad the secrets are basically like Palamutes. I love how you can call them over to get some space and to use the whetstone whilst moving. I can never go back to using whetstone and having to stand still since Rise fixed this. I love how like with the Palamutes in Rise, you can jump off of them to perform an attack. I go for this move a lot with the hammer since it's very satisfying to pull off. This really is the best of both worlds since you no longer have to pick between the Palicos and Palamutes with the newly added secrets. Also, the new weapon switching mechanic is tied to them. I'm quite content with just using the hammer class until the end of time, but thanks to this I finally learned, or at least attempted to learn, a new weapon with the heavy bowgun. I like how you can use this in tandem with riding the secret, so whenever a monster would run, I'd just chase after it and shoot it whilst on its back with the new focus mode attack. I think with weapon switching for me personally, I really like having a melee and ranged weapon since they really complement each other, and maybe this is what the designers were hoping for with this newly implemented mechanic. Especially since it defaults to a ranged weapon which, and I am going off of anecdotal evidence here, isn't as popular when compared to melee weapons, at least from what I've seen both in game and online. Just some miscellaneous points before I get into some criticisms with the beta. Firstly, whilst I couldn't do the clash move in my playthrough, one of my friends did, and the spectacle of the move is very satisfying. I'm not sure if this will be a complete game changer or anything, but outside of this one case, no one I played with, be it friends or random players, managed to perform the move. Maybe when we get more time with the final build it will become a more common maneuver, but so far it didn't seem unbalanced or anything. Another random point to bring up is that the animations are also really nice, in particular with the title screen and in-game cutscenes. Some people are mentioning how the game no longer has hit stop, which is an animation technique typically used in 2D fighting games to better convey when an attack connects with landing a hit. Once again, this game is still in beta, so maybe they'll add it in the final build. Personally, I didn't mind it or even notice it until someone else brought it up. I can take it or leave it honestly, especially in this game's genre since you're not fighting an actual player with it being a PvE centered game. The Palicos also talk now, which I personally didn't mind, but tons of articles bash this addition. Okay, so on to the negatives. Once again, this is a beta, so everything I say here is subject to change. That being said, my least favourite new feature here is the 100 people lobbies. Maybe in the full release it will make more sense, but all it did was act as an extra barrier when joining friends. The lobby codes are also surprisingly long, it's all just a bit cumbersome. It sounds cool on paper, seeing that this game had 100 players in the lobby, but the functional side of me doesn't see the point other than to lag the game out and flood the screen with names and text. Speaking of, I have an issue with some of the UI in general. Now I know the designers are limited to what they can convey on screen at any given moment, but the amount of times I had to squint at the screen to see map locations, and on top of that, the minimap is so small in this game. I had it set to the living room mode, so my UI was way bigger than the default setting, but I still had issues. The map felt cluttered at times, especially when all I wanted to see was where another player was located. I can get used to it, and maybe this is solely a me issue, but the menu navigation and map at times felt very overwhelming. This next point could be seen as a complaint, but I think this series is evolving beyond what a conventional controller can offer. What I mean by this is that specifically on console there are so many inputs where you have to hold another button to do certain maneuvers. Maybe a keyboard gets along better with this issue. This isn't an issue exclusive to Monster Hunter Wilds. I just think that with how games are getting more complex, the 18 buttons on these things are struggling to keep up. Okay, the final and most important complaint I have for Monster Hunter Wilds, my biggest hope that makes it into the final release. Please add gyro aiming. It's such an amazing quality of life function and it frees up potential inputs for players. Gyro aiming with the new focus mode will be a match made in heaven. Gyro is just one of those inputs where once I have to aim anything, I wonder where it is since the precision it gives players is incredibly smooth and accurate. And those are my thoughts for the Monster Hunter Wilds beta. Overall, this experience was incredible and it reminded me of why this series is so amazing to begin with. It really is one of the few good online game series that we still have that doesn't encourage toxic behaviour or have overly egregious monetization which banks on fear of missing out, but that's a whole nother topic. Monster Hunter Wilds is shaping up to be the biggest hit of 2025 and that's really saying something with the incredible amount of games scheduled for next year. I'm very hyped to see the final form that this game will take. But what did you think about the beta? I'm curious, please let me know in the comments. Also, any feedback on this video will be appreciated. Thanks for watching and have a nice rest of your day.